Looks like Rumble's interface got a update.
Well, maybe they got the memo. Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy, where Mike and I struggle gainfully, we hope, at least struggle, honestly, with the contour, the shape, and the feel of the modern world and wonder what's law got to do with it, and what does our common expectation of living together and peacefully in a community have to do with it. You may be wondering these days, there's lots going on. I guess we'll start with the New York City migrant crisis and contrast it, apparently, to what's going on in Saudi Arabia, not with a suggestion that the United States adopt Saudi Arabian policies, mind you. What am I talking about? The New York Post this morning reports on a poll that 82% of New Yorkers, I don't know if that's a statewide or a city poll, I believe it's statewide, called the influx of migrants a serious problem. Almost 60% want to stop the flow. And the reason for that is the state's overwhelmed with people with no attachment to the community being shipped in or bussed in, because after all, they need a place to stay. They cross the border in typically in Mexico, and then they are distributed randomly across the United States. It's an untold story in many communities, what's going on in their communities. I remember a year or more ago talking with David X. Sullivan here in Connecticut, a former congressional candidate, who reported that migrants come into the Westchester Airport, adjacent to the western perimeter of the state, usually on flights that come in after 11 p.m., so as to avoid being spotted by people. And then they're immediately placed on buses and transshipped throughout New England. Nobody really knows where they're going, except you do begin to notice when enough people accumulate and suddenly there's a drain on your social services budget. You may notice more congestion in the streets. Housing costs may go up, or motels may suddenly become unavailable. And suddenly there are new line items voted into your state budget or your municipal budget to cover the cost of caring for people who've come here and made a claim on your goodwill that you didn't agree to honor. And I say this. I say this in cringing, because what's the end point? If you say no at the border, well, what are you going to do to make that no meaningful? And so the Saudi Arabian story stands in sharp juxtaposition. Apparently, there are reports in Saudi Arabia that Border Patrol agents are killing hundreds of migrants. Ethiopians coming in who've been moved in through Yemen by traffickers, deposited on the Saudi Arabian border, and are demanding asylum in the name of their human right to this, that, or the other thing. And the Saudi Arabians are saying, well, yeah, tell it to the people in your home country, we don't want you. At what point does the influx of massive numbers of people who have been uninvited to attend the party lead to a violent reaction on people hosting the party? And I don't want to suggest that American life is a party. It is a struggle. Everybody who lives here knows it. And because it's a struggle, adding more people to the fray isn't necessarily making it an easier and better place to live. Others note that while we have this massive influx of people from South America, the people that are coming into the United States don't exactly look like economic refugees. We don't see families. We don't see a lot of women. What we see are a lot of young men. And these young men don't look like they are residents of South America. Many are very dark-skinned. Many may be coming from Middle Eastern countries. And so the question is, what's going on? And what are we prepared to do about it? I have no idea. The discussion makes me nervous. And the discussion makes me nervous because when I factor in my general sense of exhaustion and crankiness about the world at large, I realize that there is a limit to my goodwill. And I realize that there is a sense in which at some point I am capable of saying no and putting my foot down in a way that's going to hurt someone. And I'm not talking about Saudi Arabian border guards killing people, but I'm saying no to the next person at the inn because the inn is crowded. And it brings me back to the book that we talk about from time to time here, often referred to as a racist classic, but I view as chillingly prophetic. And I'm talking about Camp of the Saints by Jean Raspail, which has gone out of print. Mike and I playfully talk about acquiring the rights and republishing it because I think it's an interesting discussion. And here, Raspail wrote, I think in the 70s, it's a fable. A flotilla of refugees is heading to southern France from Asia, from India, and it's led by some Greta Thunberg like stump of a person who's got plenty of people supporting him. But whether he's got any ideas other than we're coming, I don't know. And French policymakers and French society debates, what are we going to do? And the well-meaning liberal contingent in France says, we'll open our borders, we'll open our arms, and we'll provide to them because these are our fellow humans and they're in need. The hard scrabble cynics, the conservatives say, wait, they don't share our values. There may not be enough to go around. Policy debates wage. Should we sink the flotilla? Should we direct them elsewhere? People are immobilized and they do nothing. And suddenly the migrants arrive. And when they arrive, they, not surprisingly, overrun the social institutions in France, and French life, as people knew it when they had the luxury to debate how best to live it, collapses. I wonder whether we're seeing signs of something like that in New York State. New York is a notoriously blue state. It was proud of its status as a sanctuary state. New York City, a sanctuary city for migrants. And so they said, come. Well, guess what? People did. And now they're living on the streets. They've overwhelmed the hotels. They've overwhelmed the social services. And they're leading people who live lives of ordinary struggle in the city to say no more. Well, where are these folks going to go? And, this to me, independent of all the froth and the storm and the stress of our political lives here and the debates we engage in about who would be the best candidate for this, that, or the other thing, this silent demographic reality is doing more to transform lives in major urban areas across the world, especially in the West, than any policy that actually gets discussed.
Yeah, it is particularly insidious, I think, from a political perspective, Norm, because this is one of those things that one is not necessarily allowed to express opposition to, lest they be labeled outright and as a primary measure, the full gamut of isms, right? Or ists, whatever it needs to be, right? And I'm talking about you're racist, you're whatever, phobic, blah, 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 blah. And I think that does preclude us as a country, as a nation, from having a valuable and productive conversation about the role of immigration generally, the goals of immigration to a civilized society. What as a country are we asking ourselves when we permit those from other parts of the world to gain entry lawfully into the United States,
or unlawfully, and then
I was going to say, perhaps more importantly, is what are we to make of a situation as citizens where governments, both at the federal and state level, are effectively, I don't want to say they're powerless, but they do feign some sort of ineptitude around this emerging issue. And the issue really is only facing the people out in these communities and in these densely populated urban areas. And I was listening to Tucker Carlson's interview with Colonel Douglas McGregor. I think it's episode 18 of Tucker on Twitter. Is he going to rename that to Tucker on X? That's going to be a pretty funny title, right?
The X-Files with Tucker Carlson.
One part of that interview, a fascinating interview for anybody that hasn't listened to that, and it deals primarily with the erroneous nature of our involvement in the Ukraine war right now. But what was talked about and among that was our declining economic situation. And Colonel McGregor points out that as an average American citizen who has paid into unemployment and Social Security for their entire adult life, moving into retirement, one is lucky to get something around $1,400 to $1,500 per month back from the federal government in and among all of the macroeconomic headwinds that we as a country are facing, and that whether they are self-imposed or consequences of extraneous factors or a hybridization of the two. But $1,500, and we can agree that for someone who has paid in to a system for their entire adult life while also paying taxes on everything that they purchase, every cent of income that they earn, that that in and of itself seems low. But then you contrast that with what Colonel McGregor identifies and describes as $2,200 recurring payments to every migrant coming from, for example, Afghanistan, the ones that were seen at the airport trying to cling to the plane, landing here, migrants coming from across the border from down further in South America and other places. And we must ask ourselves as a country, how is it that citizens who have paid into the system for their entire adult lives are earning, or I guess being gifted, or I would say earn, right? Because it's a direct correlation with that. How are citizens earning that much less than is being gifted to those who are coming here without any, I guess, preset obligation to assimilate to American cultural values? Not that we even know how to articulate those with any sort of consensus these days. We talk about a decline in pluralism, but I think my question is just, if we're looking at the situation in Saudi Arabia, because what I'm really interested in is obviously it's the Human Rights Watch that is reporting on Saudi strategy, as we'll call it, and actions with respect to migrants on their border with Yemen. But there is something to be said for the contrast in the way that these countries view the impact, and I say these countries, Western countries versus we'll call them Islamic countries, view the long-term impact of unchecked migration from parts of the world that do not endemically instantiate the same or overlapping societal values, right? I think that's a fair characterization of the problem. And the opposition that we're seeing in New York City, that those are growing in strength and they're becoming more widespread. But I think the frustration is most obviously that there is a property essence, like there's a property element at the core of this, right? Why is the government in the business of incentivizing, or in some cases forcing certain property owners to make their buildings available, right?
Well, we talked about what's going on in Massachusetts. We're
exactly right.
Massachusetts is asking for residents to make spare rooms and/or homes available to migrants. Now, presumably, there'll be a payment made. You'll get a stipend or something. But I say beware of that, because what begins as an ask ends as a tell. When Massachusetts has its first cold snap and it's got 80,000 people, on Boston, it doesn't know what to do with. Are they going to try to house people involuntarily in your home? Now, they'll still give you money to eliminate a takings claim, but they'll do a census, and perhaps this is going to provoke more opposition to the census. Do I really want the government to know how many people are living in my home and how many bedrooms are in the home? Because isn't that going to permit some data geek to say, well, look, over there in the Pattis household, there's 3 extra bedrooms.
Right. And then
12 migrants in there.
It might be an illusory.
And then, Mike, I wouldn't need the Social Security payment, because I'd be getting the money for housing people. And hey, what a wonderful world.
Well, to me, it seems like that is incentivizing slumlording on one hand. And then let's take it from a perspective of just the individual homeowner sharing a room or whatever. Where is there the ability for one to change one's mind after that has been tried? You have that, let's say that one is met with this sort of overflowing sense of benevolence and altruism and wants to help the less fortunate, et cetera. But the experience is quite a departure from your expectation. Does one wield the discretion to renege on that agreement with the government in exchange for whatever that modest money is to rent out part of your home? Are you able to expel these migrants from your home?
Probably not, because that would be a violation of their human right to housing.
And then what does that mean? What is the cost of action? What's the remedy for someone who's not allowed to expel someone from their home?
I try to avoid conspiracy theorists, even though I represent some of them, because I believe that a simple answer often obscures a complex reality. But every now and then I come back to thinking, man, maybe these people are onto something, because I see a lot of mockery of globalists, of the World Economic Forum, George Soros and company, saying you will own nothing and you will be happy. I mean, if a managerial elite armed with big data, can determine how best to care for the 9 billion of us, which is, I guess, we'll arrive at sooner or later. And the solution to that is that, we each are reduced to our caloric intake, the minimum BTUs, British thermal units necessary to keep us warm and or sufficiently chilled throughout a year. And these can be distributed by fiat. Maybe we shouldn't own anything, because every point of ownership is a point of friction in the global distribution chain. And so, with respect to the housing of migrants in a spare room, if your property rights stand in the way of their human rights, well, then eliminate the property rights. And some new species of big data collectivism hovers at the margin of these discussions. And the conspiracy theorists aren't making this up. They're drawing the necessary conclusions and perhaps sometimes attributing forethought to those who don't have it. I don't really know. But the point is, in my view, things like what's happening in New York explain I don't want to say resurgent, but an insurgent sense of populism. And they may go, and I forgot to mention to you this morning, Mike, I don't know if you can find the poll. They may go a long way to supporting polling results in support for Donald Trump. There was a fascinating story on Twitter yesterday, or maybe this morning, about a CNN pollster looking at poll results, both within the Republican Party and head-to-head, Biden versus Trump. And what he found was, notwithstanding 4 indictments, Trump has a huge, or as he'd put it, huge lead on DeSantis, like 63% to 13 or 20 or something like that. And of course, Vivek, my preferred candidate, is inching his way up in the polls because he's got a brain and he's trying to think through all these. But right now, Trump's the guy to beat. Well, okay, the pollster says, you may be thinking, that's fine, let him win the Republican Party, but he'll never win the general election. In 3 independent polls pitting at this moment, Trump versus Biden, it's a statistical dead heat. Biden is ahead in one poll, 43 to 41%, I believe, or maybe 44 to 41%. This is within the margin of error for pollsters. And typically polls reflecting support for Donald Trump underreport his support because people they don't want to admit that they like what he has to say. They don't like to admit that that he stands up for what they want. A sense of grievance, a sense of wanting to be heard in their own community, a sense of rejection of the status quo and the direction things are heading in. And the pollster then goes on to note that if you look at poll numbers from 4 years ago, Trump is doing far better than he did in 2020. So he becomes the great sleeper candidate because he is the candidate of people for whom no is their primary reaction to events around them. And I would suggest that would be those people voting in the New York poll on the migrant crisis. No, we just don't want any more people here. We can't deal with it. I have trouble walking down my street without getting accosted or molested by somebody. Just stop the flow. And you can have that reaction, but it's difficult to put into policy terms because you're called a xenophobe, you're called a racist, you're called this, you're called that. No, it's called being at home. This is where I live, and I don't want the world welcoming themselves to my front door. And that can't be an impermissible sentiment to have, because I think everyone has it. Remember, Mike, last summer, I think it was, when migrants were bused to Martha's Vineyard? How long did it take the good liberals on the island's head to explode? They had those people off the island within about 48 hours. Why? Because they had the means to do so. And so one of the important public policy debates in my mind that we're going to have in the next 5 to 10 years and sooner in this country is what to do about the migrant crisis. Do we say no? And, when Donald Trump talked about building the wall, he was at least giving symbolic and concrete, no pun intended, representation to a sentiment that a lot of people have. People ridiculed him. And now New York City is chanting, even though they're not saying the words, build the wall, because they've had enough. Some of those people are going to turn to Trump.
Well, if Trump is the nominee, and right now certainly the polling suggests that, and just as an additional comment on suppression of poll results, sort of similar to the way that certain stories were suppressed in and around election time. we are learning more and more and more about big tech interference in 2020. And I think that we should all expect that sort of stuff is going to continue, and it is going to augment, and it will emerge in new ways as we get closer and closer. I think I've been sharing with you, Norm, emerging about the federal government's moves for new lockdowns,
Yeah.
inspired by some sort of new variant of the virus. But I think what I have heard thus far from someone like Vivek, who appeared, as I've said before, on the Candace Owens podcast and was subject to examination and cross-examination by Rogan O'Handley online as DC Drano, he has articulated a plan for immigration. And the criticism that he's drawn for this plan, Norm, is that it removes caps from immigration. But importantly, he substitutes a numerical cap for qualitative merit-based standards for immigration.
Here's the question for
Imagine that.
Here's the question for Vivek, though. Are you going to tell the half-wit to go starve in another country? You can't come in because you're not smart enough?
What does that mean? So the unlawful attempts? Are you saying? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, look. So Vivek. I mean, I've heard him say, "Okay, we don't want caps. We want all the talented people in the world. What are we going to do with the untalented? You stay in Mexico. You go to Honduras. Somehow that just runs against the egalitarian grain in my psyche and some humanitarian instinct to want to lend a hand to the less able. However, that is not an infinitely renewable resource. And as New York City shows, when the 15th person comes through the door that day saying, help me, you got to say, no, I need a nap, or I'm out of time, or I have other things to do. But I mean, Vivek's claim for a meritocratic immigration policy makes sense. Of course, we want the world's talented. We want the talented 10th. But are we going to change the etching at the base of the statute of limitations? Or statute of limitations? Are we going to change the etching at the base of the statute of liberty and say, give us your talented, your incisive, your wealthy, your people yearning to prosper. The rest of you go back to France. And that's going to take a fundamental shift in the American psyche and how we view ourselves as a people. I don't think
we view ourselves as those described on the base of the Statute of Liberty right now. We are the tired, the poor, the weary. We are those that have the populist sentiment around Trump and around America first and make America great again is in essence that, Norm. It is that those of us who are here who have committed to the values that we believe to be in the best interest of the country and want an honest and fair living, and who aren't asking for anything more than an opportunity, are being deprived of that, and the game is being rigged, right? And it's being rigged in favor of those who are coming here unlawfully. So when we talk about immigration, I guess it's legal immigration, because his other thing, Vivek has explained, and I think what Trump was attempting to do with the wall, which I think the brilliance of the wall is that it gives somebody the ability to build something in their imagination that can be, sort of envisioned as a measure of success. And that ultimately was part of his demise, right? Is that didn't appear in reality, or it was argued and debated over in reality in a way that took away from the overarching conclusion, which was, we need to force all immigration to occur through lawful means to the degree possible, right?
Well, I agree with him. I mean, let's see what happens. I just, as to your comment that we are the poor and the oppressed here under the statute of liberty again. I don't know that I want to be a nation that defines that's primary rhetorical move is to say I'm a victim.
I agree. I want to make sure, because I know exactly where you're going, and I think I sent you a text this morning that sort of tells you where I am with that. We're a nation of underdogs, right?
And that's Vivek's point, and I think I think it's a powerful rhetorical thrust that we need to keep exploring. Politics. Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and I think that's one of the things this race is teaching us. I think that's one of the things that New York City is teaching us with respect to its reaction to the migrant crisis. interesting story, and I guess it was in Raleigh, North Carolina,
Indeed.
about a cyclist caught on I guess a trail cam sort of thing. And he's going by in his cycling garb on his expensive bike, and he sees a Trump One sign, and he comes back and he ultimately sets it afire. And people offer a reward for his identification, and apparently he's been identified.
Oh yes, he's been identified. So there was several efforts made buying through this. I think Tim Pool was one of the big voices on this. Benny Johnson was another big voice on this. They each, I think, offered $5,000 reward leading to the identification of the arsonist, and that was combined with, I believe, and who did the $1,000? James Jim White Jr. He offered he's the homeowner. He's the one who offered the $1,000 reward for identification, leading to some sort of arrest or prosecution or whatever. So he's already transferred his $1,000 to the unidentified, or the person out of California that wanted to remain anonymous, who was able to use basically GPS tracking buying through an app called Strava, which is very similar to any application that one can be running through their watch or through their phone or through some sort of device that tracks fitness. And it is a GPS tracker. And they were able to look at the video, use certain identifying markings such as tattoos, etc., to find social media profiles linked to the Strava account, and then link the activity on the Strava account to coincide with the day upon which this arson took place, and then put this person in the area. And you can see I have there on the screen the GPS coordinates tracking that. So number one, that is not out of the norm what law enforcement is able to do. I think that this is sort of a citizen-led expose on how law enforcement goes about solving crime in 2023. So anybody watching this that didn't know that this is the way the world works, you're welcome. This is. So
is this guy? Does this guy have a name? Is he going to be charged?
Yes. Well, he has a name. I don't know if he's going to be charged. This article, which I wanted to identify, Stephen Horn. Stephen Horn is an independent journalist out of the Raleigh, Durham area. We call it the Triangle here in North Carolina. But he like
is the Bermuda Triangle where people disappear.
Yeah, it's the RTP, Research Triangle Park, is sort of the Raleigh, Durham, greater Raleigh Durham area. Stephen E. Horn on X, StephenEhorn on X. This is his Substack. So if you're interested in some local journalism here in North Carolina, I do encourage you to look that.
It's kind of a neat phenomenon because, it's people gathering together saying something happened in our community. We don't like it. We want to resolve it. And so they've found it. They've found the identity of this person. Now, what can he be charged with? There is a statute in many states. I call these offenses fourth outfielder offenses. When something goes wrong, but it's really doesn't merit its own position, left field, center field, right field. You have like breach of peace or criminal mischief. This would be a criminal mischief kind of charge where he engaged in destruction of property of low economic value for his own purposes in ways that discomfited the homeowner. It's probably worth a misdemeanor and a fine, but the fellow should probably be held accountable.
And I misspoke earlier. No, the name is John Kane. What I was saying with the James Jim White Jr., that is the gentleman who burned the Trump flag.
Okay.
So I just wanted to correct that. I'm sorry for anybody that I confused. What I put on the screen here is the selfie video from John Kane, and he is explaining the issue of really the danger of the flag burning. And it's what he's making the case for in this video is that number one, I love North Carolina continues to be the center of the known universe. Again,
as does your navel. I mean, come on.
But what I love about it is that there are people like Mr. Kane who will tell you just flippantly as they're recording a selfie video that the American flag is flown properly above any political signage. That was one of the first things that he says in this video. I have this sign here, I have the American flag, like it's, properly done, So it's just almost like you're at cotillion for a half second. And then he goes on to the actual story. And then he explains that, he's got this sort of canopy of trees that go right to his home. And so the fact that this guy was willing to set the sign ablaze was one thing, but that he was willing to do it when so obviously it could lead to very drastic consequences is the big issue. And he has children, and his children and he and his wife are asleep in this home. And so I think his sense of things here is that you can be politically diverse, right? But that sort of arson or action taken is so beyond the pale. And I think what I put here on our banner, what conclusions may we fairly draw? I mean, this is a cyclist. We can draw all sorts of assumptions about Mr. White Jr. here, but someone that is willing to take a lighter to a political sign, irrespective of the consequences, it says something about the mentality associated with Trump within the party that is opposed to Trump.
And I mean, look, forgive this droll observation, but what's a cyclist doing with a lighter? I mean, does he stop and have a secret smoke?
I think he went by this house several times, right? So the article that I put on the screen from Stephen Horn, so he had prior knowledge that the sign was there, and I think on the third day he decided to whip out the lighter.
Honey, can I borrow your Zippo? I want to make the neighborhood safe for our children. I need to burn a sign down. And if the house goes down, well, we can replace it with a migrant camp. Look, some questions on YouTube from today's content. Photography. Did the polls we mentioned have a third-party choice, or it was just Biden-Trump? It was just Biden-Trump. And so it's early, but I think that the purpose was to test what effect, if any, the 4 indictments had on Trump. Freedom Lover takes a poke at me. You're not poor, Norm, so of course you wouldn't understand. You don't know where I came from or how I came up, Mike, and you don't know the status of my soul. The fact of the matter is that all of us deal with the world with a limited fund of resources and cope with what is coming at us as best we can, whether rich or poor, whether you started with a silver spoon in your mouth, which I most assuredly did not, or earned one, which I may have. You nonetheless have to set a place at the table with only so many pieces of silverware and only so many places. And when people just keep coming, it's going to wear you out one way or another. Dawn is wound up. She wants this fellow charged with terrorism, and why not?
It's a great point, Dawn. Right? Turnabout is fair play.
So I've spent, I'm preparing a reply memo to the United States government's memorandum asking that the Proud Boys be treated as terrorists under the sentencing guidelines. And here's what I learned. Under the sentencing guidelines, if a felony is committed and it's one of some almost 50 named felonies, a person can be designated a terrorist for federal sentencing purposes. And of those 50 named felonies, you've got things like nuclear terrorism, bioweapons use, interfering with interstate flights, disabling communication systems, things that have serious effects on the broader world at large. And then there's the destruction of property count. And so that's the one count that the Proud Boys were engaged in. What's the property? A fence worth about $30,000 that was used for crowd control. When a government can't draw distinctions between using a bioweapon, nuclear terrorism, material support for international terrorist organizations, and destruction of a perimeter fence, all hope is lost. So Dawn, maybe we should call it a hate crime. Maybe we should designate them terrorists. Maybe we should just back up and say to government, sit down and shut up. If you don't have a way to contribute something of value to our day-to-day lives, then let us solve it for ourselves.
Well, and I'm just making observations from these photos, which is totally fair and within the boundaries of modern discourse of the intelligentsia. But look at these guys. I mean, no offense to his colleagues there on the left, but these are unimpressive people. I mean, imagine like having the gear, going out in the suburbs, riding bikes, which I already have. I'll go on a soapbox one day about my issue with cyclists in general in suburban areas on 2-lane roads. And it begins and ends with something like this. Why is it that your lack of self-preservation or predisposition for self-preserving becomes my existential problem? And I'll leave it at that for now. But it is interesting, right? The conclusions you can draw from someone who is willing to burn a flag, who takes himself seriously enough to dress in the garb and burn opposing political views. Perhaps he believes in climate change. He might have a flag in his social media bio. Any of these various things, right? And it's sad that I'm willing to go that far, but that's how unserious of a person he becomes after actions like this.
But he's hooked into Strava, and he can tell you what his resting pulse rate is when he wakes up. So let's give him that. And he undoubtedly monitors his sleep statistics and can tell you when he's had enough REM sleep and when he needs more. So, I mean, everybody gets a medal in the United States these days. And his cultivation of an exquisite and thoroughly documented sense of self bears noting, doesn't it?
And I think we owe an apology to, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. We keep claiming that we're going to, and we just don't.
Yeah.
We just don't. Really the reason I wanted to get to it, Norm, was just for the theme of the supremacy clause within the Constitution. We don't necessarily need to get into that today, but Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution, what we call the supremacy clause, and how that might impact a ruling on his motion to dismiss. One thing I don't know.
How seriously should you take the United States Constitution? Very seriously. So every practicing lawyer should take it under his should periodically review case books on important topics. And so every 2 or 3 years, I will buy a new constitutional law case book and read through it just to make sure that I understand what constitutional law scholars are up to and what the courts are up to. So weighing in at 5.3 pounds, arriving in yesterday's mail, is the Constitution of the United States.
What corner is it in, Norm? What color is the corner?
The corner?
Yeah. From what corner is it fighting from? The red.
Oh, well, this is a book edited by 2 of the authors on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, scope and sweep, which we've been talking about, Michael Bowd and Michael Stokes Paulson. And so I will report periodically on my read through this modest 1,660-page book and try to engage you in some of the thinking that lawyers engage in when they think about the Constitution, because it is our fundamental law, and there are such things in it as the Supremacy Clause. And we will get to Mark Meadows and the Supremacy Clause. Somehow the immigration discussion diverted us today. I would encourage all of you to go out and get yourself a con law textbook and then read through it and ask us questions about it, especially if you're a new law student. We talked before about wanting to reach out to new law students and to provide them with a counterweight to the silliness that they'll be taught in class. The Constitution's text, structure, and history, like every other topic in the law, is independently available to a reader. All you have to do is decide you want to make it yours. And when you do, you empower yourself to enter a vivid national debate about the meaning of the law and its reach into our lives. And you begin to have tools that you wouldn't otherwise have had to discuss things like, can migrants be placed in your home? Fantasy football.
Yep. Fantasy football is coming up. And it has not started in the sense that we have a platform and we're making invites, but give us until Friday to get those invites done. I'm of the opinion, I'm a seasoned fantasy football player. I'm of the opinion that in startup leagues, especially, you want to give enough of the preseason time to wrap up before actually selecting players to teams and beginning to get into that mode. I want everybody to have as much information stemming from, mini camp, training camp, injuries, preseason as possible before we set the draft date. But those preliminary items will be done by week's end. You'll be getting emails in the next couple of days inviting you to Law and Legitimacy. So be on the lookout for that.
I'm ready, I think. Actually, I'm not ready at all. I'm starting to panic and looking at online sources about how to conduct the draft. I'm a sometime fan, but I'm going to enjoy every minute of it this year. I can't wait to start. Thanks for taking the bull by the horns there.
Oh, absolutely, and we'll have a little bit of help as well. A couple of daily viewers will be helping manage that. So looking forward to making that a full experience for anybody that gets involved. I was going to make a comment earlier about with inflationary pressures around the world. Hedge inflation by buying a con law textbook. Because ultimately, you like what you just flashed for the camera is like basically worth a gold bar, I think, these days.
Well, no, I mean, these books are expensive. This goes to Freedom Lover's point about being poor. This book probably cost $250. But it's something that we will return to over and over again in the course of the next year, because the Constitution and its application to our lives is endlessly fascinating. Or so I think, and I will make every effort to explain to you all why it should be to you as well. So, just in case, if you're concerned about tropical weather moving into your Southern California home and you want to make sure the porch is held down, buy one of these books. Your porch will be 5.3 pounds heavier. And even if you don't read it, this will be ballast against hard times.
Oh my
Tell
God.
them Norm and Mike sent you.
Yeah, that's right. You'll get nothing off, and they won't know what you're talking about, but you'll feel better about yourself. We're here every morning, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern time. We're on Rumble Video, which seems to have gotten a nice facelift to its user interface. It still doesn't have a static stream key, but I guess that's still cooking. YouTube Live, as well as being live on X at LawPod Daily. Please follow us there. We are getting dangerously close to 500 followers, at which point we will unlock subscriptions via X and begin to get some of that written content that was kind of struggling over on Locals into.
Yeah, my bad. I meant to do it, and then I went on. I started writing stuff. Then I went on vacation and just lost motivation to live. And now I'm back to work. So I guess I'll be back at it.
So if you're here, make sure you leave a like on the video. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're so inclined, hit the notification bell. You can find every day's stream uploaded directly to all podcast feeds thereafter: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Audible, Overcast, etc. Norm, we will see you tomorrow morning. Maybe we'll give Mark Meadows his due shine. Maybe not, though. This is our stream. It's not his stream.
Yeah, for all I know, I might not even be in the office tomorrow morning. I mean, the mayor of New Haven may just decide to put 6 homeless families in here, leaving me on the street looking for a place to read my law textbooks.
Anyway, we will see you tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Follow LawPod Daily on X. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.
That's true.
Bye, Norm.
Bye.